Welcome to this special edition of Pitchside. My name is Jamie and I'm here in the studio with Dom and Marky. This is a live debate about whether boxing or MMA is better. Marky is representing boxing and Dom is here for MMA. He's a fellow journalism student and he writes regularly for his own MMA blog. I'm going to start off by quoting a piece from Floyd Mayweather. He says, "It takes true skills to be in the sport of boxing, and MMA is for beer drinkers. Boxing is for everybody. You can't take my shoes and shirt off and throw me in a cage. You do that with animals." What's your response, Dom?
Well, I think that quote's ridiculous because saying boxing takes true skill and MMA doesn't. Boxing is a part of MMA. But MMA fighters learn boxing. We have GSP, the current worldweight champion, is trained by Freddie Roach. Shogun, who are also trained by Freddie Roach, a former champion. Cub Swanson, featherweight fighter, trained by Joel Diaz and trains with Timothy Bradley. So same. MMA fighters do boxing as well, is what I'm trying to say. And plus they have so many other aspects of the sport, be it wrestling, Muay Thai, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu. So it obviously does take skill. And the fact that it's for beer drinkers, MMA fighters are some of the most athletic people on the planet. We have former Olympians, former NFL football players who all do MMA. Current women's champion Ronda Rousey is a former Olympic medalist. We have Daniel Cormier, former gold medalist in wrestling. So it's not just for beer drinkers, it's for professional athletes.
And I'm going to throw this back to you now, Marky. I'm presuming you're going to agree with Floyd Mayweather about the whole rootlessness and animalistic kind of vibe that it gives off. What do you think?
Well, in some ways, yes, but in some ways, then again, no, I don't. I think he's gone a bit too far with some of the stuff he said. Like for beer drinkers, obviously MMA it is a skill in itself. It's a discipline like boxing, and it's obviously the beer drinkers. I don't agree with that because obviously it's a sport you have to be very athletic. Like boxing, they go through a lot of training. Like you said, a lot of the MMA fighters are trained from famous boxing trainers like Freddie Roach. And also, didn't James Toney, he tried to cross over into MMA and he got knocked out in the first round, didn't he?
Yeah, well, he gets submitted in the first round.
Yeah.
Horrific.
So, yeah, it's two different sports in itself, but yeah, I prefer boxing because I think it's a better test of strength and stamina and spirit. And, the fights are longer, so in MMA it seems to be it's structured to appeal to younger audiences. So it's over quicker. Like boxing, it goes on for longer. So
a lot is said about the sweet science and how boxing it's an ancient thing. I know MMA it goes back quite a way, but boxing's been a professional sport for years and years and years. Surely that makes it a stronger sport.
Well, yeah, I think it has the history and the tradition that MMA perhaps doesn't have. MMA it's a relatively new thing. It might be the fastest growing sport in the world. Is that right? Fastest growing sport in the world, but it doesn't have the tradition. It doesn't have the Muhammad Ali's, Jack Johnson, people who enforce cultural change on America and the way black people are perceived and the rights they have.
I think it's fair to say that boxing isn't as in the forefront of the sporting world as it once was with people like you just mentioned, and now MMA seems to be taking over a little bit. Would you agree, Dom?
Oh yeah, I was gonna mention it. I think boxing, the golden days as they call it of boxing, I think they've gone. The likes of Sugar Ray Robinson and Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano, I think fighters like those, they come around once in a lifetime, and guys, there's no one like that around today. Maybe Floyd Mayweather is up there, but other than that, there's no one on that sort of level. And the thing with MMA, because it's such a new sport, we're seeing it grow in front of our eyes. It was UFC came out in the year I was born, and so I've literally grown up alongside it. And you can see if you watch the old tapes compared to the ones now, you're seeing spinning heel kicks, back elbows, ridiculous submissions that you never even dreamed of seeing in the early UFCs. And people like Anderson Silva and John Jones are just reinventing the sport. And I just think in 20, 30 years' time, you'll see it'll just grow. And yeah, it hasn't got the lineage that boxing currently has, but I think it will do in the future.
With MMA continuing to grow, are you worried, Marky, that boxing may be losing out on quality athletes that are just going to go to MMA to prove themselves more?
Well,
is there going I know at the moment there's more money in boxing. Could MMA overtake it, or what way is it going, do you think?
Well, I agree with Dom that boxing, there's a lot of problems going on within boxing. And like you said, it needs more characters. It needs more Floyd Mayweathers, people like that. The heavyweight division is the most boring it's been in years. It is terrible. Nobody wants to watch a Klitschko fight some guy on. They don't even make pay-per-view. They won't take them in Vegas anymore because it's that boring. They'll fight some nobody. They'll win easily, and it just keeps going. It needs more characters, and it needs like people like you said, like your Rocky Marcianos, your Joe Lewis's, people like that, just to get it back.
When there is a big heavyweight fight, I think it's more likely to sell than an MMA fight, just because of the whole history of boxing and its view in the sporting world. But is MMA going that way now? Is MMA going to overtake? Like, it's continuing to rise. Boxing's on the decline, and does it seem like it's going to change? Is it just going to keep going and going and going until boxing becomes part of MMA and there's nothing left?
Well, I don't think the sports will ever merge. As say, I think boxing will always be there, and I think MMA will always be there. But like Morgan said, boxing needs more characters. If there were 10 Floyd Mayweathers in the world, boxing would be 100 times what it is now. I mean, they need people that can fight and that can sell. That's the thing. MMA has those problems as well. There's MMA fighters that can fight really well, but they can't sell tickets because they have no personality or whatever it may be. And I think that's a problem that both sports have, is that they need people that can fight and people that can sell tickets. They need, like, for example, Chael Sonnen in MMA, he's not the most exciting fighter in the world, but he can sell tickets. He's the most highly paid UFC athlete of all time because he knows how to sell his fights. And regardless of who he's fighting or his style of fighting, people want to see him fight because he can sell his own tickets.
Boxing fans often argue that there may not be room for both. What do you think?
I wouldn't say there's not room for both. I'd just say, like, I think boxing has a lot of problems, like we've already discussed, but when it gets its act together and puts on fights that people want to see, it is still going to, like, outmaneuver MMA. I think I found an example of it. It was the Pacquiao Margarito fight, 2010, 2011. There was a UFC fight on the same night, and even though Pacquiao Margarito was on pay-per-view, it still beat the UFC in the ratings by quite a long way.
I'm going to come on to the money situation now, because there's a lot more money in boxing, and one of the big problems with mixed martial arts is outside the UFC there is little to no funding for the grassroots level. It's all the money is in one place, but boxing's more spread out. This is a big problem for MMA, and if it's going to grow, surely UFC, there needs to be other organisations other than UFC. I know they might say Pride or whatever, and over in Japan or wherever it is, it's quite different, and there's money there. But outside of the big organisations, there's nothing. There's very little.
Well, yeah, that's an ongoing argument in MMA at the moment, is that it's argued that you can't make money unless you're in the UFC, and even if you are in the UFC, you're not guaranteed to make money, because they say getting in the UFC is the easy part, the hardest part is staying there, and there is some truth to that. There's Bellator in America, which is the second biggest organisation, but even though the fighters in those organisations don't make half as much as what you would make in the UFC, but I think it's because it's such a new sport. I think that's the problem. Obviously, UFC are going to pump money into their biggest fighters. Obviously, they're going to sell more tickets, and it's argued that they are letting the less well-known fighters and fighters in lower organisations. It's not a way of earning a living at the moment. But the thing that they always say is that you have to pay your dues, so to speak, in the sport by fighting on these small shows that no one goes to watch and fighting for £200 to win, £200 to show and £200 to win. But it will all pay off, and by the time you get to the UFC, you'll have a fan base and you'll be making the money that you want to make.
Thing is, boxing is the exact same though. There's, you do have to start off somewhere, and you do start off fighting in small clubs and stuff. But there's more money to be made in boxing, which I think is a weakness that MMA has. But this is something I want to say to you now. I'm going to ask the two of you the same question. Boxing historically has been an instrument for social change. Mark, do you think MMA could ever reach those heights?
I think it'll take a while. I think it's like any new sport. I mean, I'm sure football wasn't that vastly developed in the 1800s. Like boxing, like I said, we got your Jack Johnson's the first black heavyweight champion of the world. The American media built up every challenger that fought him as the Great White Hope. You got Muhammad Ali, who made a stand in the 60s, world heavyweight champion, embarrassing America, saying he was against the Vietnam War. I think MMA and UFC needs more profile for its fighters to be able to do things like that. Not like saying it's like part of the job, but it's just not there at the moment, and I think it'll take a while for it to be there. Yeah,
the best fighters always seem to be they usually come from poverty and stuff like that. It was the Irish Americans, then the Italian Americans, then it was the Black Hispanic Americans, and that's the way it is now at the moment. Same Same to you, Dom. Do you think MMA could become an instrument for social change?
I think it has the potential to be. I don't think, compared to like when Muhammad Ali was around, there was the whole Vietnam War. We don't have really a situation like that at the moment in society, so it's hard to do something on that level. But I think the fact that MMA is worldwide, there are numerous fighters, over 50 fighters in the UFC that are from Brazilian backgrounds. There is Brazilian world champions in every division, former or current. There's Japan is another huge base for MMA with Pride and deep promotion. And even in England, it's grown in England with recently had the very first. You had Dan Hardy a few years ago being the first British fighter to fight for a world title. Michael Bisping, the first British fighter to headline a UFC event. We also recently had a few years ago the first Rampage Jackson versus Rashad Evans was the first main event to feature two black fighters, and I think on a smaller level compared to what boxing has done, it is breaking boundaries, and I think it will just continue to do so.
I'm going to move on to corruption now, and there has been a lot of talk about that over the years in boxing especially, and I know where there's any sort of professional event there always is corruption there, but it's obviously been well documented about boxing, and especially in the 40s and 50s with the mafia kind of owning a lot of the high class boxers and having a lot of say in what happens in the results of fights. What do you have to say to that, Martin?
Well, yeah, there was Jake LaMotta, wasn't there? He was partly controlled by the mafia. I think he threw one fight, and it was that obvious that he was throwing the fight. I think he got knocked out in the fourth round, and the guy who was fighting, he was carrying him. But yeah, I think corruption, you're gonna get it anywhere. Like you hear of football matches that is thrown. Like cricket at the moment, I'd say cricket is the worst sport for it at the moment because you've got all the spot fixing and the match fixing that's going on because it's so easy to fix something in that sport. But yeah, and I also think another problem with boxing is you got promoters who are just in it for the money and like to bleed a fighter dry and then leave them on the floor once they've made the money out of him. People like Don King, like I absolutely despise the man. Like that fight, Muhammad Ali and Larry Holmes in what was it, 1980, 79, 80, it should have never happened because Muhammad Ali was in no state to fight then, and everybody knew that Larry Holmes would absolutely steamroller him, and Don King was the main man behind that fight, encouraging Ali to be part of it. I think it was a rare occasion where the challenger has been paid more than the champion.
I think it's unfair scrutinising boxing like this, but because it's obviously been around a lot longer and there's obviously more cases of corruption. But I'm sure there has been cases in mixed martial arts.
Oh well, there's a few, but the difference is that mixed martial arts, when you fight for the UFC, you fight for the UFC. You don't fight in any other promotion, which is different. With boxing, they have you can fight. They have a promoter for a boxer, right?
Yeah.
And they fight other fighters that are promoted by other promoters. But in the UFC, every fighter is promoted by the UFC. Yeah. Therefore, you're not gonna get mismatches as badly because the UFC have both fighters' interests in mind. But obviously, you do get mismatches, and there is Bellator, the other organisation in America. It's been argued that their CEO John Rebney he's done a lot of things because he's compared to Dana White, the CEO of the UFC, who is a fan of boxing, became a boxer, and then went on to manage fighters, and then to run the UFC. John Rebney is a businessman. He's always been a businessman, and has argued that he has done a lot of his decisions based on business and not based on the fighters. And he has put in a few mismatches, a few 45-year-old fighters that should not even wear gloves, but he's putting them in against younger up-and-comers to sort of boost the up-and-comers' record. And there is corruption. I don't think it's anywhere near the level that there has been in boxing, but there is the threat of it.
Yeah, MMA fans often point to the fact that in UFC the best have to fight the best, which is something that isn't always seen in boxing. You get people that are ducking fights and stuff like that. Is that going to change in the future? Do you think it needs it? There's pressure on boxers now to take these fights, and if it doesn't, is boxing going to go the wrong way?
Well, I think everybody's been expecting Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao to fight for about the past 5 years, but they keep ducking each other. The problem is there's too many belts. There's like 4 different organisations for each weight category. You got WBA, WBO, IBF, and IBO. If I'm right, they're like the 4 main ones. We also have WBF. And a couple of others which aren't as important. So like fighters they're reluctant to gamble. Say like they've got 2 of the titles, and someone else has got 1. They're very reluctant to like put everything they've got on the line, and scared of losing it. And it's very rare for like a fighter to become undisputed in the heavyweight division. I think Mike Tyson was the last Lennox Lewis was the last in the heavyweight division. But like it's like the Klitschko brothers at the moment they won't fight each other. They're not going to fight each other because they're brothers for one thing. So it's just not going to happen. One's I think Vladimir's got 2, Vitali's got 1, or might have 3, and Vitali's got 1. But yeah, it's just not going to happen. It's just like a monopoly on like the top, and it's very hard for like when you're the champion, you get to pick who your fights are, and unless it's a mandatory challenger, they can fight who they want. They're not even fighting people in the top 10 sometimes. Just a bit of a joke, really. Like the best fights, like Tyson Fury, is like making his way up the rankings, but it'd be very hard for him to get a title shot because there's too much politics and too much like of a monopoly on the top there.
Outside looking in, it looks that UFC and MMA will be the more dangerous of the two sports, and a lot of people do say it's quite ruthless. What do you think about the safety?
Well, it's understandably it is a brutal sport. I mean, it's the most rawest sport you can get. It's basically war condensed into a legal sport. It's as real as it gets. I mean, it's two guys fighting. Of course it's going to be brutal, and people use that as a way to discredit it, saying it's a brutal sport. Of course it's a brutal sport, but what sports aren't brutal?
In comparison to boxing?
In comparison to boxing, I think it's a lot safer than boxing. I mean, in the UFC's been going for 20 years, had its 20th anniversary in November. There has never been a death or serious injury in a single UFC fight, and there's been upon thousands of UFC fights. There's been, as far as I know, 3 deaths in MMA in general, and all of those deaths are medical based in promotions no one's ever heard of, and those fighters should not have been fighting. But in the main stage of MMA, there's the worst injury is a broken arm that I know of, or one guy broke his leg. That's the worst injury there's ever been. The fact that when the fight stops, both corners have a professional doctor that comes in and checks their fighter. There's all the mandatory checks. Whenever a fight is cut, the referee stops the fight, and the cut is checked by the doctor. And he also checks the fighter's well-being, asks them if they want to continue, asks them where they are.
Does the same not happen in boxing?
It does happen in boxing, but I think boxing, the whole knockdown rule in boxing makes it a lot more dangerous than MMA, because in MMA, you get knocked down, the fighter could hit you maybe 2, 3, 4 more times, and then the referee will stop the fight. In boxing, you could get hit with some horrendous shots, get back up, as long as you can stand on your feet, then you can get hit more. You might not. We've seen it countless times in boxing fights where the fight should have been stopped, but the referee has not stopped the fight, and the boxer has just been stood there covering up and being hit with punishment that he shouldn't be taking. And the fact that in boxing you hit the body or the head, there's a lot more shots going to the head than there are in MMA.
I'm going to let Marky come in now.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt, and I think Dom would agree with me that both sports are dangerous, verging on brutal. The thing is with boxing is like, if there's a boxing fight on at a certain venue, the nearest hospital is always notified and on standby, just in case. You've always have a ringside doctor. The knockdown, yeah, I agree to a certain extent, but the amount of times that we saw in the Frock and George Groves fight, the referee perhaps jumped in too early.
Yeah.
Like, referees are more aware. They don't want to be that guy who refereed a fight where someone got seriously hurt, like the Nigel Benn, Gerald McClellan one in the 90s, because Gerald McClellan is in a wheelchair now, he can't speak. That went on for far too long, and they were taught to look out for signs, stuff like that. It's like every knockdown, you always find them, like, they'll count till about 8 or 9 at least, even if they're still up, because they'll be checking their eyes and whatever. And a lot of the time you see the fight stopped anyway, even if they have got up, because they're just all over the place. They can't stand up straight.
Yeah, I don't agree that boxing is more dangerous. I think any sport that deals with blows to the head is dangerous. The only thing I would say, UFC deals in a lot of submissions and stuff like that, which chokes and stuff. That can be quite dangerous, if they let go on too long.
I mean, it can be dangerous because when you
especially when people don't tap out, because you do see that.
Yeah, you do see that quite a lot. There's a lot of people that think it's macho and think tapping out it means you quit, and they'll rather pass out than tap out, which is a stupid way to think about it, because if you're getting choked, you're going to lose whether you tap out or you pass out, so you might as well tap out, because what's the point in risking the serious injury? But the fact is that the USC has recently installed a healthcare program in America where all the fighters for, I think, 30 days after the fight, they have healthcare covered by the UFC, so the fighters don't have to pay for any of their healthcare. After a fight, the UFC will pay for it all, and there's numerous cases. The most recent one with Conor McGregor injured his knee in a fight, tore his ACL, I believe, and the UFC paid for all his treatment so he could recover. It's not like a fighter injures himself and that's it. They're left to deal with it. The UFC does help because the UFC knows how dangerous the sport is and how likely people are to get injured. So there is help for the fighters.
Mark, would you agree with me when I say that there's more opportunity to get injured in UFC?
Yeah, I do, because I think there's more to go wrong, really. There's a lot more because like, you're using your feet as well. You've got all the holds and whatever. Boxing, obviously, there's a lot of potential for injury in that as well because you're getting hit to the head, you're getting hit to the body. Your vital organs are in your body. You're hitting someone in the aim is to concuss them, to knock them down on the floor. But yeah, I think UFC is more dangerous from what I've seen because like there's more to go wrong, and like you've seen like smashing each other off the cage and stuff like that.
I think that is true. Being that you're attacking more parts of the body, obviously there's more likely to be injuries. But I think the referees deserve a lot of credit in MMA because they are highly trained, regardless, except for a few who are terrible. But the majority of them are highly trained, and if you see a fight where a fighter is locking in submission, the referee will be as close to it as he can be, and as soon as there is a tap, the referee jumps immediately on the two fighters and will separate them. The same with a knockout. There's been numerous cases where a fighter's been unconscious on the floor and his opponent has gone in for another blow and the referee has jumped in between the fighters. So I think, being the sport it is and being that it is so multifaceted that there is a lot more chance of injury, but I think the promoters and the referees and the judges take all that into account and there is a lot more safety based in that sport.
This one's to you now, Marky. Do you think that mixed martial arts is on the same level with regards to rivalries?
Well, I just think like it doesn't get enough exposure to be on the same level as boxing for rivalries. Like we've seen in the past, like we have Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. Like that's probably one of the best sporting rivalries of all time. Those two hated each other. Like Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward. You just don't hear of it in UFC. Like I haven't heard, you don't often get a grudge match. It's like the Carl Froch, George Groves. People watch that because they didn't like each other. I probably don't watch enough UFC MMA to know like the rivalries, that kind of thing. But I don't know what Dom thinks.
Well, I think you do get rivalries in the UFC, and there has been some just classic rivalries already. I mean, you got Chael and Anderson Silva. Chael beat Anderson Silva for 4.5 rounds the first time they fought, and then got caught in a submission in the last 30 seconds of the fight. And being who Chael is, that his trash talking between those between that fight and their second fight was just on a different level to any sportsman that I've ever seen, and that has been the highest grossing MMA event in history because of the rivalry that those two have. And it's the rivalries in every division. I mean, you've got John Jones and Rashad Evans, former training partners. One left the group, and so there is rivalries. But I think based on it being such a new sport, that the rivalries will grow as the sport develops.
Well, we've heard about money, we've heard about safety, we've heard about the history of both sports. Both sides are giving a good argument, I think, and we're going to have a poll on the website that you can decide what sport do you think is better. And that's all from us. Thank you.